Let's get into Tank Davis's draw with Lamont Roach this weekend at the Barclays Center in my city. Just to start off with, it was a great fight. It started a little slow, but it felt like it really heated up once they kind of got a sense of each other and what they wanted to do. I did an interview with Jordan Roach prior to the fight, and he said something really interesting to me, and I didn't know what he meant when he said it. But I was like, where's this confidence come from? Like everybody in your team was like, we got this. Like not even like we respect him. They were all like, nah, we got it. And I was like, where's that come from? And they were like, he said to me, he was like, Tank has mental problems in the ring. And I was like, what do you mean by that? And he was like, I'm just gonna leave it at that. But if you grew up with him, you know what I'm talking about. And so I when he said that to me, I legitimately didn't know what he meant, but it stuck with me as I left the hotel that day. And then we're watching the fight, and very slowly, I start seeing what he's talking about. It's not a bit. He doesn't have a meltdown. It's not like a who's the guy that fought Lennox Lewis that started crying?
Oh,
Oliver McCall.
Alder McCall, yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't nothing like that. But we started to see little cracks. We started to see moments of frustration where he's kind of barking at Steve Willis, and the corner's starting to look a little more frantic, and they're wiping his face really aggressively. And then, of course, we have the knee. He's taking the knee and he's running over, and all of a sudden the rules don't apply to him for 15 seconds, and he's getting his face wiped down. There was some cracks that we started to see for me in Tank's mentality, and as Lamont, who came in with this beautiful strategy and just executed it perfectly. He's on the front foot. He's taking Tank's best shots. He's coming back with beautiful counters, and he's really not avoiding any of Tank's firepower the way everyone basically has, other than Leo Santa Cruz, and it didn't work out for him. What do you make of this fight? I think the common sense, right, is that the knockdown happened and therefore Lamont Roach should have won. But even at that, the fight as it stood, I also had it 7-5 Lamont. And so the draw in and of itself was tough to swallow for me. But just give me some of your initial thoughts and reactions on a fight that, as much as I knew Lamont was going to compete, I just didn't see it playing out that way.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think my first thought was, man, I think this is the most exciting Tank fight ever. And that's not to suggest that Tank is a boring fighter. He obviously is not, but that sustained action and drama going on, and then I don't know, there's also that thing that only boxing I think can provide, where you have like a megastar like a Tank Davis, and that feeling you get in your stomach when they might lose for the first time. It's not like anything else in sports, because you see in team sports, like, teams lose all the time, right? It might be a shock if like the Chiefs lose the Super Bowl or something, but even the most dominant team, you see them lose. And when you have like a fighter like Tank Davis, who's so central to the mainstream of the sport, and is one of the biggest stars and has never lost, as the fight is progressing and you're starting to question, like, is he going to lose? Like, that feeling is so special in boxing. But I agree. Like, as I was watching that, I was thinking, like, hey, didn't and if I remember correctly, didn't Roach beat Tank like when they were kids in the amateurs or something? And I started thinking, like, maybe that has something to do with this, right? And hearing, what you just said about talking to them, about them extracting something from knowing Tank when he was a kid, clearly there was a level of confidence there that, I know a lot of people scoff at that, and a lot of times those types of results don't matter. There are, Terrence Crawford lost to some weird fighters in the amateurs when he was a kid too. It doesn't mean they would go on and beat them in the pros, but yeah, this looked like someone who just didn't fear Tank whatsoever, and clearly didn't with his approach. And then a guy in Tank who, yeah, like clearly was having some either like mental or emotional struggles in the ring there. And again, it's hard to decouple that from what Tank had been talking about for months prior to the fight, and talking about wanting to take a break from boxing. And I actually have found Tank's arc, so to speak, over the last couple of months really fascinating, and kind of heartbreaking or heartwarming, talking about, like, hey, I want to go to therapy, but I feel like I can't because there's a coldness that I feel like I need to be a boxer. and it's like it feels like he wants to step out of this. And watching him behave in that fight, yeah, like that the tension in his corner and that maybe like the lapse in judgment by taking a knee that ultimately didn't cost him. And again, like it felt like someone that just wasn't maybe all there in the way that he was before. And I have empathy for that in a big way. But I still think that Lamont Roach should have won the fight. Yeah, like whether you justifiably scored it 7-5 without the knockdown anyway, or whether you thought the knockdown should have been the difference, I think that Roach should have been the winner of that fight.
So this is just something I saw this morning, but there was a fight of maybe within the last 2 years that Amanda Serrano had canceled because there was something in her hair that actually physically burned her eyes, and she
Yes,
was
yeah.
unable to fight. And it looks like something similar happened to Tank in the ring for this fight. And so I know that people are going to clown on him, but fighters are people, and if there was chemicals burning his eyes, I think that there's no doubt that that would affect your performance. It's not to make an excuse that it's not an excuse. If you're going to get your hair done, that's probably something you should be aware of that could
Sure.
happen, particularly when another star just had to cancel a fight recently. Um, but I think the like you said, the lack of connection, the talking about retirement, the seeming like boxing to some extent is behind him. I think that's what I started to feel like. He's looking at boxing in the rear view. That's why he fights once a year. You know what I mean? That's why it's not always the fight we want to see. I don't know that that's important to him.
Yeah, well, and he remember he actually had a really fascinating interview with Lil Yachty on his podcast, and he like looked dead in the camera and told people like, hey kids, like don't box, go play soccer instead. Like there really does feel some, it doesn't feel like there's some almost like resentment, like that he's like reluctantly participating in the sport, so to speak. Like he owes it to some people to maybe carry this out, or maybe like there's a certain dollar figure that he wants to get to before he can walk away,
Yeah.
whatever it is. With the hair situation, like, yeah, it could have been something that caused that. When we were watching in real time, someone pointed out like they thought that maybe his braid had kind of swung and hit him in the eye and had kind of caused like a sort of like temporary blindness. And like all those things are absolutely valid. And if Tank took a knee because of those, it still would have resulted in a knockdown. But I don't blame him for taking the knee, right? Like I don't fault Tank for that not being called a knockdown. That's a Steve Willis judgment that was the wrong call in that
Yeah.
moment. And by the way, tough month span for Steve Willis between that and then allowing that Skylar Lacey Brandon Moore fight to continue that nearly killed me when they crashed through the commentary table. So
Really?
not a good 30-day span for referee Steve Willis. Did you see that clip?
I didn't realize that they
Okay.
almost fell on top of you.
When we get off the air, or even right now, just type in Skylar Lacey, Brandon Moore. It was the
Okay.
co-feature of Clarissa Shields and Danielle Perkins in Flint on February 2nd. And whatever, go back and watch that fight. But basically, it was very obvious from early in the fight that Lacey's only plan in this fight was to hold and to try and tackle. And it was building and building and building until eventually Lacey did what clearly he was intending to do the whole time rather than box and tackle Brandon Moore through the ropes, through our commentary table, and to the floor. And then ultimately it got thrown out. So anyway, I generally think that Steve Willis like has a very good eye for fights. I think he has a good thumb on the pulse of like when fights should be stopped. But it's an unfortunate little 30-day span, I think, of judgment calls that he could have done better.
I think that's a very nice way of putting it. Um, I've wondered since this fight, just in the last couple of days, I think every fighter has a bad night, right? Like every fighter has an off night where it's just not their best. But like you said, there was so many signs or symptoms, that this could be coming. And on top of that, Lamont Roach was ready and had the fight of his life, right? But do you think, just your opinion, do you think this is a moment where Tank goes back and retools and recommits, or is this his Broner Malignaggi moment? Where it's like, you know, this is either going down or it's going up. You know what I'm saying? Like
Right.
I can't quite tell where we're at with him right now.
I think that all of that has to like that is all within Tank's heart, and whether this result has made him think like, no, I, I need a better performance to maybe go out on, or it's basically like does the and I'm not saying he should be embarrassed by this performance, but I'm going to use this term. If he feels embarrassed by that result, and that motivates him to want to do better, or if that just confirms what he was clearly feeling before, like, hey, I don't really want to do this for much longer. Um, that's really the question, right? And if that I can't answer that, and only Tank can really answer like how badly does he actually want to do this anymore, because he clearly doesn't have to. Tank seems financially set, and it doesn't really matter. And Tank also, like, one of the reasons why he's this popular is that Tank is also kind of a part of broader culture that extends way beyond boxing. There are a lot of people that watch Tank fights that don't watch any other fights. And I think the Tank could probably have enough, whether he wants to just disappear from public life entirely, which is kind of what he's talking about, or whether he wants to kind of just stay, kind of in the cultural zeitgeist a little bit as like a fashion influencer of sorts, because he seems to be one as it is. Those are all pivots that he can make too, but I don't quite know what direction he's going to go from this.
Let's show a little love to Lamont Roach for a minute.
Oh yeah,
Nobody really gave much of a chance to win this fight, and he really had a masterful performance. He came in, he was prepared, he had a real chin on him, he had a fantastic defense, he had underrated power. He clearly looked better and stronger and revitalized as a lightweight. And there was just so much to like. And of course, because Tank is such a big star, a lot of the conversation is going to be dominated by, well, what happened with Tank? How did things look from Tank's perspective? But to me, in Lamont Roach, I saw a guy who potentially could beat anybody in that weight neighborhood and is like maybe even a pound for pound type of guy. And I don't want to jump the gun, but I come from the thinking of you keep what you kill. And I thought he beat Tank Davis that night. You know what I mean? And so
yeah.
to me, we have to start talking about him with a whole different kind of respect moving forward, it feels like.
We definitely do, and that includes me. I mean, Lamont Roach turned out to be way better than I thought, right? And that's not to
Yeah.
say I didn't think Lamont Roach was good, but that definitely shocked me. And the question is is will Roach prove to be in like overall better than we thought, or was this kind of like the perfect moment, perfect style matchup of a guy that he had like an otherworldly level of confidence against because of their background, or is he actually can he do that against other top 135 pounders, or if he goes back to 130? Because really, like a lot of elite fighters and mainstream kind of elite fighters have that kind of scary, dodgy decision, right? Mayweather Castillo over your right shoulder, right?
Hmm.
Or like Canelo versus Lara or whatever. Like there's a lot of like great fighters often have that night, and sometimes the guy on the other side of that fight doesn't then turn out to be like super great themselves. But we'll see. But sometimes it is the breakout performance where we found out that maybe Lamont Roach is one of those guys that we ought to talk about in that top 10, top 15 range. It certainly makes him unbelievably compelling moving forward, whether it's a Tank rematch next or against someone else. I would love to see the rematch, obviously, but I'm almost more compelled to see him now against one of these other guys, to maybe get a clear determination of like, hey, was this just a great night for him, off night for Tank, or is
Totally.
Lamont Roach indeed great?
Hey, shit, if he can get a fight with Shakur next, I would love to see that. If he can't get any of these lightweights in with him, I've heard him say he'll go back down to 130. Sign me up for Roach Foster tomorrow.
Hell yeah. Yeah, hell yeah. Yeah, why not, right? Like, how about let's throw Rocky Hernandez in with him? Let's do it.
It's funny. I said that the other day, and I was like, I never thought after when I looked at the lineup of fights that I would be like, yeah, when this weekend is over, Rocky Hernandez versus Lamont Roach is going to be a fight that I want to see. But fuck it, I want to see it.
Let's fucking do it. Yeah.